Hi everyone. How are you, Jen? How are you, Annie? How are you doing today?
Great, great.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Okay, great. Thank you so much for joining us in this Global Customs Manager interview series. We are really delighted to have you today, and would like you to feel free. The discussion should be very open. Feel free to share your thoughts. We like this interview series because we get insights from trade readers. So on you go. Annie, you can go ahead, introduce yourself. Then Jen can go ahead.
Wonderful.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Anne Karen. That's perfect. Well, I'm Arne, and I'm the managing director of Customs, the Customs Manager Limited. And it's always one of the highlights of my week when I get to speak to esteemed experts such as Jane today. So, hi, Jane.
Hi, Arne, and I'm Jane Stanley. I'm Head of Customs and International Trade for Lidl in the UK.
Well, it's so great that you could make it. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure, and we've been working together for so long. So this has been on my bucket list for so long.
Excellent.
So great. So today's topic is it's a bit of a tricky one because we're going to talk about what is about to happen, and that is the 10th anniversary of the referendum in the UK on EU exit. And you are, of course, a Brit, and you are in the UK, and you've lived it, and it's a big event for the UK. So we've got to talk about this. But however, we're going to use it not only to talk about the past, but more importantly, about the future. We're going to look at your background, your industry perspective. We're going to look at what good looks like in customs compliance today. And we are also interested to hear about professional standards, especially with intermediaries, especially with brokers, customs agents, and your take on that. We're interested to talk about competencies, the importance of training and technology. We want to talk about the future of customs in the UK as an independent nation, free from all the shackles. So there's so much where we want to get your insights on, and we're grateful that you're with us. So with that said, let's get started. First question, I guess, is all about, once in a life, we have these moments where we know where we were when a certain event happened. And Brexit certainly was one of those events. So whenever I talk about this topic, I ask people, where were you and what were your thoughts when the results of the referendum, which happened on the 23rd of June 2023, what happened when they came in?
Fine. So I was working for a retailer, not where I am now, working in rest of world markets, but a substantial retailer with facilities on the high street and of course with the mail order business. And I think although we prepared largely, we hadn't anticipated that the referendum would go to a leave position. And I think along with a lot of other people, we were shocked and concerned for the future, of business, interactions of the younger generation and how that would pan out in terms of our position, our risk, and our ability to trade. So it was a bit of a surprise, nothing like we had expected in terms of a result. But nevertheless, what we then had to do was look at the plans we'd been making and put them into fruition.
Okay, great. Well, this is great. Good news that you had plans. Many companies may have thought this is not gonna be a leave, and therefore we're gonna hold on plans. So what was your emotional state when you got the results? Can I ask?
Ah,
Can I ask?
I'm going to be careful here. I was devastated. Although from a professional point of view, because I'd always worked in importing, exporting rest of the world market, I wasn't perhaps as nervous as people that had never experienced the vagaries of importing or exporting across a border. And a lot of people, for 40, 50 years in business, had sort of grown up, evolved, and had been used to the free market, the common market as he was when it was established. And so, it's quite alien. From a point of view personally, I was disappointed because a lot of opportunity, went for the younger generation, and it did create some challenges. And I don't think since the whole program, around the Brexit in, the whole rollout of BTOM and other alignments, or should we say, disenfranchising from the EU has quite gone to plan, not certainly as it was sold. And I think the whole referendum was very much misunderstood and missold. But that is my particular view.
Of course, we all have our view, and it's water under the bridge, as people say. But it's important milestone that we are hitting on the 23rd of June, 2026. So we ought to reflect, because when we reflect on where we've been, we know where we might want to, go or not go in that case. So speaking of that, you have extensive experience supporting customs compliance and best practices. So well, how would you say has the role of customs intermediaries? And when HMRC calls it customs intermediaries, they mean really brokers and those that sit within the customs space, and compliance professionals. So how is customs compliance profession, the brokerage and the customs agent profession, how has that evolved in your career's time, and also especially maybe since the Brexit vote?
Absolutely. So, I mean, the role, in my opinion, it's moved more from being largely transactional to being more advisory and assurance led. Customs intermediaries are no longer just simply submitting declarations. They are expected to understand the client's supply chain, identify risks, challenge incomplete or inconsistent data, and of course support businesses in meeting their legal obligations. Certainly since Brexit, the volume and complexity of customs requirements has increased significantly, we know that, which means compliance professionals now play a key part in helping businesses trade efficiently whilst reducing exposure to errors, delays, penalties, and reputational risk.
Okay, that was a lot. There's a lot we need to unpack here. I mean, if you'd said that, let's put it that way. What are the major changes? Let's put it that way. Let's see that you have seen in the UK customs landscape since Brexit maybe, and what development would you say had the greatest impact on UK businesses, but also EU businesses trading?
Yeah, I think a lot of operations historically were port centric. There is, I think, an old way of working where people sat close to the brokers, everybody sat close to the ports, people nipped down to port offices, got documents stamped, and that was it. And there was very little interaction between traders and brokers or people that were moving goods through the supply chain, other than we've got an operational contract, that'll do, won't it? And so the concept of identifying risk, of taking ownership for businesses, and realizing that was more than transactional, came hard, and a lot of business struggled with it because they couldn't. Now that I say a lot of business that hadn't perhaps dealt with rest of the world, that where they were used to other customs regimes and getting stuff across borders, struggled because they hadn't the expertise, they hadn't the understanding, they hadn't the systems or even the basic documentation, and then relied heavily on brokerage, which wasn't perhaps necessarily trained and up to speed, struggled to understand the rules, which were, being rolled out as we went along. We know the first year of Brexit was terrible. It was an ever-moving landscape, and some of the legislation didn't come into play until almost 2 years later, because the Brexit transport operating model was actually a 5-year plan. And it didn't go to plan. So yeah, that was I think a very big challenge for a lot of business.
So can we say that there was widespread confusion? Is that fair to say? Or
for sure. Yeah, there was. Yeah.
And is it also fair to say that we tried as best we could with what was given to us? Is that, I mean, I don't want to make it sound like we were all, headless chicken running around, but we, generally we tried to do what we can in a situation that was that was quite challenging and unique to that extent because nobody had Brexited before or had left the EU before.
No, exactly. So guidance was poor. It was late. It was lacking, and it was a case of, we're learning together. Come along, importers, exporters, with the authorities and also intermediaries. Let's do it as we learn. It's a shame, but that's how it happened. And there was I think, a serious issue in as much as we didn't have infrastructure, we didn't have the systems, with the authorities in place, and we still don't to some extent, to facilitate trade in the right way and to allow that data exchange across borders. And that was a big failing for sure.
So I'm gonna move us on from Brexit, but I have to ask one cheeky question, if you may, because let's not jinx it, but there might be some in the future that some countries, maybe some areas that might consider a similar path. Okay, we hope not, but now that you've lived it, you've experienced what it means to leave the European Union or stay with us, the single market and the customs union. What would be, if you had to do it again, what would be the one thing or the two things that you say governments should do before they implement a similar Brexit style, from a customs perspective only? What would be the two things you'd say countries should definitely do if they ever wanted to do such a foolish thing?
Are the systems adequate to support the transactions? Are they sufficiently developed? Is the technology supported in a way that would allow smooth transactions from border to border, from country to country? Because we found out that wasn't the case. That is absolutely important. We live in a data-led society, and without that, then it was very, very challenging. And that was the biggest problem, I think, with the UK. It wasn't keeping up even with the EU and some of their systems that have now been put in place. And when it came to, crossing borders and data exchange, we were severely lacking. And so that was the biggest challenge. And also the framework agreements. Some of those were not in place until more than 2 years after we had Brexited. Bad, and that led to a lot of issues and complications and risk for business. And any country, anybody considering that needs to ensure that the technology's there to support it. It's well tested as well, because some technology was put in place and there was no testing and it fell over. And we know systems, fell over regularly, but also framework agreements. Without those in place, you've got no controls. You've got no regulatory framework to work from, to actually control those borders, or the trading landscape with other entities. So that was bad, I think, and that's two key points.
Sounds to me like winning the referendum was the easy part.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, fine. So now to the real parts, the parts that really we came here for, is to understand your view on one of the fundamentals in customs that, whether you Brexit or you don't, hasn't changed, won't change, not in the UK, not in the US, not in any part of the world, and that is compliance. And I wonder, over the last years, especially again with I remember in the early Brexit days, compliance was more of a recommendation. We had a year where no customs declarations were lodged from the EU because we were still so intertwined. So maybe that's unfair to say, but what today does good customs compliance look like in practice? And if you talk about it from a business perspective with your head of customs role, what are the key foundations that every business should have in place right now?
Ah, well, good customer compliance really does mean having clear governance in place and accurate data. Competent people to put effective controls in place in practice, and every business should know who is responsible for customs decisions and maintain accurate commodity codes, origin evidence, understand valuation and duty implications, and retain appropriate records. It also means having documented procedures and taking the time to put those in place and understand what you're documenting and how you actually put that into practice. Regular checks, escalation routes, and a culture where customs is treated as a business risk rather than an administrative task or an irritation to the wider business.
What do you mean? Is customs not an afterthought? I mean, is it not a business irritation? I mean, for sure, the customs people only come when the problem has occurred. That's what should happen, right?
No, the customs people should be there beforehand. We're the gatekeepers. We're the people that should be consulted when you are negotiating the buying contract, when you're looking at the terms of delivery, when you're looking at how you get the goods over a border. Customs should be the port of call. What documents do we need? Do we need licensing? Do we need to register for something? Are there restrictions? Sanctions? All of those things before you actually put the order in. Have you ticked those off? Have you got things in place? And if we have to do all that, is there a cost? Are there benefits? Are there free trade agreements, or are there anti-dumping duties which may erode a margin? All of those things must be considered and must be discussed before you engage with signing that contract with the supplier and getting the goods moving. So customs shouldn't be the afterthought. We shouldn't be there to mop up the issues after the problem has occurred or the goods can't get over the border. And I think that now is something that people are realizing, and should be at the forefront of every buying director's or business's mind.
Interesting thought. Well, I personally agree, but obviously, yes. So yet still you hear it, you see it in the news, you hear about it, mistakes continue to occur, even though what you said is pretty obvious. So how can there still be mistakes today after you explained to us that we need to move everything to the forefront? Customs needs to be one of the first areas, not the last areas that you integrate. What are the most common mistakes that you have seen when managing customs declarations, customs processes? Anything to share that you want to highlight in particular as regards mistakes?
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, on forums and within customs groups and businesses, and I think that the common mistake is business do make are that they rely too heavily on brokers without providing thorough and complete instructions, using correct, commodity codes, communicating them in a way that the broker can understand, misunderstanding origin rules. Origin, can be a hot topic, a meaty topic on its own, and working out origin and accumulations and things, and really determining that and communicating it clearly, to the broker. Applying the wrong customs value, additions, subtractions, royalties, licensing, the amount of businesses that don't really understand that, that I've come across is a little bit worrying, or even brokers for that matter, failing to retain adequate evidence, of how you got to that assumption, how you have, why you've claimed a preference, for instance, or, determined that a sanction isn't needed. So all of that is important. And another frequent issue is poor communication between departments, and it goes back to what I said earlier. Purchasing may agree terms that create customs implications, but the customs team only see the shipment then at the point of clearance, in some cases, and so therefore it's too late. And then in an isolated transaction basis as part rather than a wider compliance framework, that's when it starts to fall over.
Okay, yes. I mean, it sounds like every part of it matters, like a little bit here, a little bit there, and all comes together as one of the big issues that arise when little parts, important parts, are not put in place or not implemented, right? Okay.
That's right. Yes, right from ordering through to arriving the goods. Every element of that supply chain is key. Understanding the risks and what the requirements are, and clearly documenting them and getting that in place. And this is why SOPs along the process, clearly understood procedures, not just writing them but communicated and and lived, are really important.
So HMRC has introduced, and this is particular for intermediaries, as the HMRC calls them, or brokers or agents, as we call them, has introduced these professional standards, voluntary, I understand, called PASS 41201. Seems to be a voluntary standard managed by the BSI, and that is now rolled out, and it looks quite good and reads quite well. Can you shed some light about why that happened and why we need a customs intermediary sector standards? We are kind of in the middle of the EU not having any. Is that fair? I don't even know. But the US having the strictest customs brokerage exam in the world. Why are we doing this?
So, I mean, I've got a view on it. Everybody might agree, but I particularly lobbied for a standard for customs brokers. What I found is, pre-Brexit, when back in the old days, when some of us that have been around a bit longer, we're dealing with other markets. There was a competency, a learning. We'd worked in customs for a very long time. We'd learnt skills, and there was a degree of professionalism there. However, as Brexit approached and we saw the advent of it, a lot of people that had perhaps worked in shunting loads around, or other areas of forwarding, suddenly decided to set up as customs brokers. People working from the back bedroom. Not that I'm disparaging anybody that's done that. However, without any standards, any controls, any real credible tested experience, insurance, indemnity, all of that. And so therefore the market became very volatile, pitted with risk, and anybody suddenly could stick a banner up on the internet and call himself a customs broker because their experience of shipping, and that was dangerous in my opinion. And so I could see that there were some very poor brokers because of this in the business, and that there was a big risk. And like you, I'm very aware that in other countries, then customs brokerage is licensed, and quite rightly so, and people should take exams and prove that they are professional, competent enough, be registered, insured, and audited to ensure that they are at the right standard. So it is important that we have developed, or we have developing, a consistent benchmark now for customs intermediaries, and that people do work towards attaining that. And this is important. It's not the same as AEO, which is around the compliance. This is more around the standard, its quality, its professionalism, its mandatory training, without it being mandatory, but it's setting out expectations for diligence and systems and data quality and service, and it's very important that traders recognize that and embrace it. Personally, I would like to see these principles adopted and become a mandatory ask by supported by HMRC, rather than a voluntary standard, because I think that would improve the professionalism and the competency across and reduce the risk across the intermediary business. Love or hate it, I think it's a necessary thing that should happen in the market.
I personally think it is a very necessary standard, and I think it is actually something that we should look at it not only from the UK perspective, but from many other regions around the world. Even probably the World Customs Organization may wish to take a look at something similar. And the UK shows us that there is a step in between not having anything on one side and having a very rigorous training process and an exam process managed by customs authorities, like the example in the US. So having this voluntary standard is certainly a welcome step. And I think it will go a long way to improving the way we file customs declaration and the compliance that goes with it. I mean, I, for one, find that a very, very important step to professionalizing the intermediaries industry, open brackets, even more. Close.
I think so. Absolutely, I agree with that fully. And, as a lobbyist for this standard to be introduced, and like I say, I would like to see it become mandatory.
So competence, training, and technology is the next block we're going to talk about. And I can sense where this is going because you have already talked about the professional standard. So the next question is probably going to be quite self-explanatory, but do you think that competence is important in customs? And what about this CPD business that we know in the UK so much, the continuing professional development programs? Do we honestly, today I can go and look up YouTube, all these videos where everybody's explaining everything. That must be enough, right? I mean, there's also government guidance. There's so much on HMRC's putting on the gov.uk website. I mean, surely we don't need to overdo it. Learn and learn and learn, get CPD points, go to professional training. It's enough. It can be self-taught, right?
No. And I think competence and CPD are essential because customs isn't static. Rules, systems, trade agreements, guidance, regulatory expectations all evolve. And people involved in customs operations need to understand not only how to complete a declaration, for instance, but why a particular data is required, why errors may be, but it also maintains or helps to maintain professional standards. You wouldn't have somebody in purchasing, for instance, handling big contracts without the Chartered Institute of Purchasing qualification. You wouldn't have somebody in tax doing tax returns without the necessary tax qualification. You wouldn't have somebody in a legal business operating without doing the relative the right degree, and also the solicitor's exam, which is arduous, I know from experience. And so therefore, why would you have somebody operating in customs that has no qualification, no competence, or very little, and no way of proving that, and isn't keeping up to speed with regulations as they change, and operating requirements, and therefore is only relying on a YouTube or word of mouth? That isn't, I believe, a professional way now to work, particularly when most intermediaries and people in customs are handling millions and billions of pounds worth of goods crossing borders, globally in some cases, and that transaction, and plus the associated duties and risks, etc., at the end of the day is assigned to a business. It's the responsibility of the importer of record, for instance, that particular business, and its reputation, its damage, its risk. And why would you have somebody without that professional standard or those professional qualifications, handling business at that magnitude? It doesn't, makes sense, and it's really not, something that I would like to see continuing in the market.
Agreed, but also training takes time. Training it takes people out of the business for so long time. Which business can afford to send someone on 8-hour training courses again and again and again? I mean, there has to be a balance here, right? And so what's the solution here? If you say training is so essential, but my business can't afford sending someone to a training camp for a whole week or so because customs is so complicated. And then where do we bring technology into all of this?
Yeah, so there are online learning platforms, and where you can do your learning out of hours, where you can build up that learning and then take an exam and be certificated, and that is essential. I understand that businesses can't all pay for big training courses or to have somebody taken out of the business and sit in rooms for hours on end. I get that, but there are opportunities, and there are credible opportunities for online training and certificated training, and that must be explored and used, because this investment is an investment in the future of the business, but it's also an investment in the future of lots of businesses.
Yeah,
because if they don't train, and if there's no continued development, then who is going to work with a business? Or if a responsible company engages with a broker and audits and finds that they haven't got the necessary qualifications, or on a regular basis are making mistakes because of lack of knowledge, then they're going to lose business and they're going to have reputational damage. So it's an investment in the future, isn't it?
Yeah, agreed. Quick word on data, and you've mentioned it already. Data is key, and I'm slightly concerned because the more and more we talk, and the more and more I see what governments and authorities do, we seem to be turning to be data processing experts rather than customs people. I mean, in my time, we classified, we determined origin, we developed. Now it's all about the data integrity and using AI and whatnot. And are we still customs people, or are we data processing humans? I mean, where are we heading, Jane? What's this thing with data quality and the systems we need, and how does it support compliance? And are we still doing customs, or are we doing just data optimization and cleaning?
Yeah. So data, in my opinion, is the oil that drives the engine. Without, clean and credible data, you haven't got a customs process. Technology and automation are valuable because they enhance that, but they should only support expert judgment rather than replace it. Automated systems, can improve speed and consistency and help to capture data, but they're only as reliable as the data and rules behind them. Human expertise, and I underline the word expertise, is needed still to interpret complex scenarios, review exceptions and challenge assumptions, and make judgment calls around things like classification, origin, valuation, and customs procedure rules and use. The best approach is a strong combination, I think, of digital tools and clear controls and skilled professionals. You can't 100% rely on AI, for instance, or some of the data platforms, and you shouldn't do. And I think some of the authorities stress that, and so you still need expert judgment. You still need people that can interpret the legal framework to back that up. But you can use data-driven systems to speed up the transactional process for sure.
Well, I'm glad that you say that we still have a use. We humans, we still have a use. I like it. But that brings us neatly to the final part of this talk, which is the future outlook, right? And your closing thoughts, because we always finish our interview with the invitees' last thoughts about everything that that we talked about. So a couple of questions on what you think is going to happen next, crystal ball kind of scenario. what trends do you believe will shape customs compliance, will shape customs in the UK, will shape trade facilitation, the whole lot? What is the thing that you're looking at right now that we all should be looking at but may not?
I mean, I think that the future is going to be shaped by digitalization. Love it or hate it, it's how that is managed and how that increased use of data is more targeted to support compliance activity and expectations around professional standards. And I think businesses need to be more proactive around managing customs risk rather than only responding to issues when intermediaries, um, you know, do something wrong. We need to embrace new standards. But I think particularly, I think now in our landscape, we need to be acutely aware of the geopolitical situation that's going on, because across the world, things are very unstable. A lot of things are changing regularly. The USA, if you're dealing with the USA market, you're going to have a spreadsheet that blows up every day with changes and tariffs and rules, and you start thinking, right, at what point do I implement this or not, and is it for real? Then there's things going on in other parts of the globe, sanctions, blockages, new ways of having to get goods in, and that in itself means that the future outlook is volatile. There is no digitalization, no AI tool that can navigate that landscape and advise on it, and mitigate the risks or identify the risks and produce a strategy for dealing with it. So there's I think the need for customs professionals and advice and support is greater than ever, because I think the risk is going to be greater than ever, and even if there's an EU reset, that still doesn't take away the rest of the world risk. We will still be part of a customs regime, and I think people suddenly think, oh, that would disappear. Far from it, and that reset isn't necessarily going to be what people expect. And businesses are still going to have to map their customs compliance and look at the risk from their particular supply chain perspective.
And it's very interesting, because the customs border, we think of it as having appeared when Brexit happened between the EU and the UK, which is partly right. But the customs border was always there. The customs always with the third countries was always there, right? With America, with Australia. So we are in a very interesting situation. I agree with you, whereby we deal with digitalization, we deal with the impact of AI, we deal with a huge amount of technicalities that will challenge anyone's brain. And then the shifts in globalization, moving from a more open and free and global world to a more regional world, where conflicts occur more often, and when they do, they occur more severely, more intensely, if that may happen. So all of that impact of supply chain disruption through conflict and events impacts the way you receive your goods, and that ultimately means clearing goods are impacted by that as well. So it's a mix. It's a whole mix.
Yeah, it's very volatile, and the customs landscape is going to continue to be like that, I think, for some time, unfortunately.
So last point before your final message to everyone. Just one practical advice point, right? So businesses seeking to improve their customs compliance, tell me one thing they should do so that listening to this interview, you want them to take away what?
So I think the business needs to know that they must take ownership of customs compliance themselves. They are, at the end of the day, the person of record. They are responsible. Even when an intermediary submits declarations, the trader doesn't lose that responsibility for the accuracy of the information provided. It's there that, they should map their processes, identify who owns each data point, document their procedures well, and regularly review those. Don't think that, because you did something in 2023, it's still okay today. If you don't review it, you might find that the legislation has changed. Are you keeping up to date with it? Or has the business process changed? Oh dear, yes, it has. Or has the sourcing changed? You don't know if you don't review it regularly. So that is got to be, key. A practical risk-based review of existing processes is often really the best starting point for every business.
Nice.
Love it or hate it.
Yeah, we've all done this, right? It's
Yes, indeed.
the first time the risk analysis, gap analysis, whatever you want to call it, is daunting. The second time, not as much because you've done it before and you're just plugging some of the smaller risks. The first time it's
Absolutely.
challenging, but if you get into a habit of continuous improvement, it all, it pays off in the medium term even. In the short term, it's a bit more time intensive and probably costly, but once you got your ducks in a row, it's easy to replace one duck rather than all of the ducks in a way.
Exactly, and it is about continual improvement in customs. And like I said earlier, customs isn't static, and that's the thing that people misunderstand. They think, oh, there's a set of rules. There's a customs handbook. We've all seen the handbook from HMRC. Well, we'll use that. We'll follow it. There's an AEI, AEO. Set of criteria. We're ticking the boxes, aren't we? We're not, because if we think that, then we're making a mistake. Continuously reviewing, right along the supply chain, and all those data elements is really important. It's critical. And like I said, the biggest mistake is to think that you've done it, you're okay, because 2 years ago you put a process in place, or even a year ago, and the brokers will look after it, won't they? The intermediaries. And it isn't their responsibility. It is their responsibility to use that data, make an accurate declaration. But it's always very much the business's responsibility to ensure that that compliance is maintained and the data that is used is accurate within any framework agreement.
And it's advice and support that, like you've shared with us today, that puts us on a good journey to changing mindsets. I guess that's where I feel we're on. I'm not saying we're still completely ignorant to it. No. With the Brexit, and it's good to kind of close with what we've started. If the Brexit has told the UK businesses something, is that our mind needs to shift, our ideas, our perception of what we would need to be doing has shifted. And although we're not at the end yet, and there's still a lot of reliance on maybe intermediaries and assuming they know, I believe that we had to grow up a little bit in the UK from where the EU was free access and customs didn't exist. We didn't need to worry about that. We now had to grow up to do what other countries have been doing all their time. But I think we're still growing up, and we're still not 18 years of Brexit or 21 years of Brexit. We're just 5 years of Brexit. So we're growing into the independent nation we want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think enough businesses understood the ask. And whilst there was forward planning, it wasn't done with a compliance mindset and the real understanding of what the risk and the customs complexities truly look like. For those that were used to rest of world trading, yes, to an extent, because there was, controls and obligations and things to be met with authorizations or methods of trading. But the general, we used to trade with the UK, just slap it on a lorry or move it across, the straits, because that's what we've always done, the same as we shipped to the next county. It came as a hard stop and a bit of a shock for sure.
So we've reached the end, and I am so thankful, because it is not every day, let's be honest, that we can ask you questions like that, because you're all, we're all busy people, and And it is a special moment. So thank you so much for taking the time.
It's okay.
What final message is the final question we always ask? Would you like to leave with our viewers, the customs professional and businesses navigating today's increasingly complex trade environment? The final thoughts are with you.
Yes, for sure. My final message should be that customs compliance should be seen as an enabler for trade, not a regulatory burden. And I think a lot of people see it as that. Strong controls, competent people, accurate data, and clear relationships with intermediaries all help goods move efficiently and reduce the avoidable risk. But the environment will continue to change, as we've just said, because of the geopolitical situation and challenges in certain markets. So business must invest in good governance and training and continuous improvement, in inverted commas, because that's all key, and be best placed to adapt and succeed, without any damage to their trading position or reputation.
Thank you very much. And that is all she said today. So Anne, Karen, thank you so much for allowing me again to be on, and thank you, Jane, personally. Thank you so much. And Anne, you can sing us out, so to speak.
Thank
you
you
so much. Thank you so much, Jane, for the time. I really enjoyed the interview, and I'm very sure that our viewers will also enjoy as well. Thank you, Annie, for the amazing questions. They were not so drilling. They were very comfortable. Thank you, and I really hope that you'll have more time next time, not just the 45 minutes interview. Thank you again, Jane. Thank you again, Annie.
Thank you. Yes, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you next time.
Okay, bye. Bye.